World. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you do not have to. You can call me the ominous Shahaminous. Okay, so this video is basically about ex-criminals glamorizing crime and making money from it. So I saw a recent video which went viral and I thought I have to make a reaction video to this. It was actually a cat playing the piano. I thought it's got nothing to do with true crime. Then I watched another video which was PIERS Morgan interviewing the American ex-mobster Michael Franzese. So he's a man who was in the Mafia life for many, many years. He got out of it a few decades ago, went to prison for a long time, basically found God. He's got a whole redemption story. That's him over there. And this video is viral. So right now it has got 1.5 million views, I believe, and it got 1 million views within the first few days. So let's take a look at it. So this episode is going to be about me playing clips from this interview, telling you my thoughts of the whole situation. Then I'm going to talk about the ethical issues of ex-criminals profiteering from discussion of previous crimes. And then I'm going to talk about these true crime conventions. So you might have heard of CrimeCon, for example. I actually talk at some of these conventions, so I'm going to talk about the fact that I might be a bit biased, but I'm also going to tell you my honest insights into what goes on in these places, what kind of things are discussed, what's the purpose, what's the tone, is it disrespectful to the victims and their families, etc., etc. But before all of that, let's get into the PIERS Morgan's video. I'm sure most of you know who PIERS Morgan's is. For those who don't, foreign viewers, for example, he is a British news media personality. He's renowned for being really polite to his guests, for being really level-headed and fair, for being left-wing. He asks questions that are sensible and above the belt. And if there's one thing that PIERS Morgan hates, it is making controversial statements. Oh, and everybody loves him. Anyway, I'm going to play you some clips of this video and let's get straight into it.
How lucrative is it to have been a senior member of a Mafia 5 family? I mean, at your peak, when you were a captain with 300 people under you, how much were you making?
Well, I devised a scheme along with a partner to defraud the government out of every tax on every gallon of gasoline. We ran it for about 8 years. At the height of our operation, we're selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, taking down 20, 30, 40 cents a gallon. We were bringing in $7, $8, $9 million a week.
A week?
A week, yeah.
And how did that get distributed?
Well, obviously we had payroll, so to speak, but, I would pay up to the family. The boss got a piece of that. I got a piece of it, and the people involved did, so.
These are huge amounts of money.
It was, yeah, very significant. I don't think there was any bigger operation since the days of Prohibition other than drugs. Drugs in another level, but it was.
Can you be a captain overseeing that number of people and actually for the length of time? How long were you a captain?
Well, I was made a captain at 80. I got out of life in 95, so.
So over a 15-year period, I mean, I know you've been asked this question many times. Did you kill anybody? I mean, to me, it would be ridiculous to assume you hadn't.
I'm just kind of smiling because of this clip, PIERS Morgan's basically saying, how much money did you make? Have you killed anybody? Which, pretty interesting questions to ask an ex-mafia boss. I'm sure if you're ever in that situation, those are the questions you would ask as well.
You can't be a mafia captain for that length of time in charge of that number of people and not kill people, can you?
Well, Pierce, let me put it this way. It's a violent life at times. And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. And yeah, as a captain, I was given an order, was told what to do, I did it.
But you would personally kill people?
No, I didn't say that. But I knew when it happened.
You would order people to be killed?
I didn't order it, but if I had to carry out
I did it. If you don't mind me saying, you're being a bit weaselly with the words, because if the order came down, it was your job to make sure that order got executed, literally.
Yeah.
People got killed.
People got killed.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't feel good about it. Jordan Peterson asked me this question, and he said, Michael, if you had to commit an act like that, what would you do? And I said, well, maybe I stepped out of myself for a moment and then stepped back in later on. Because, listen, murder is never pleasant. You don't ever...
Yeah, I agree with that. Murder is never pleasant. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what PIERS Morgan expects from this. He's strongly insinuated that that's part of the life and that's violence and he had to do that. So he's not going to openly admit to members of the public about killing somebody that hasn't been discovered by the police and he hasn't been punished for. So it's kind of a nonsensical question to me. Yeah, he's said it without saying it, hasn't he? And I don't think anybody, let alone a mafia boss who's taken the silence of a murder, the vow of a murder, is going to admit further than that. So I don't know what Pierce is expecting from this.
Ever worry about that scene in Godfather 3 where Pacino says, they sucked me back in?
No. I have no desire. I'd have to be out of my mind, Pierce. I mean, I wouldn't last, number one, on either way.
I mean, you look and sound a bit like Pacino in Godfather 3. That's why I'm asking you. He's about that age in the movie when he gets sucked back in. Something happens, and he feels himself.
Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back.
Yes.
No, never happened.
You know, nothing could persuade you back in.
Nothing.
Whatever happened.
Nothing.
All right. Michael Franzese did a little bit of that scene, but I would say every time I try and get out, they keep pulling me back in. Again, I'm not just trying to shit on PIERS Morgan here, but I think that's a bit of a silly question. Why would he? Well, first of all, even if he did want back in, which he clearly doesn't, the guy he talks about other parts in this interview about all his regrets, all the people that he's lost, or most of the people that he's known from that life have died. He went to prison, really bad things happened to him. He saw lots of things he didn't particularly enjoy most aspects. So he's just given this massive interview and he said all of this publicly. So why would he want back in, number one? And number two, he came out in the life, was it 95 or something? So it's been, it's been 30 years that he's been out of the Mafia. I'm pretty sure you can't just walk into the Mafia after 30 years. You've lost all your connections, life has moved on, the kind of schemes they're involved in is moving on. So I think it's a bit of a nonsensical question. To me, it's like asking Michael Jordan, who I believe is 60, 61 now, if you go back to the NBA. A reasonable question is, do you miss being an athlete and being in the NBA? And the answer is probably yes. And maybe there's some aspects that Michael Franzese misses of being in the Mafia, like the privilege, the money, the connections, etc., etc. But there's a difference between missing it and actually potentially going back in. Michael is 70 odd plus now, so I think it's just a bit of a silly question if you ask my humble opinion.
Do you have regrets?
I do.
What are the regrets?
I think some of the things I've witnessed. I had a best friend that was murdered. I had a lot of guys. I saw a lot of death, Piers. A lot of people that I knew that I liked are no longer here. And some of them I think shouldn't have died.
How many people are we talking?
Oh, God. Well, I'll give you a little example. Fortune magazine wrote an article, 1986, 50 biggest and wealthiest mob bosses in the country. Huge article, half the magazine. They featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6. They had a chart with the 50 of us on there according to rank and wealth and power. I was number 18, youngest guy on the list. 5 behind Gotti. He wasn't boss yet. But out of that list of 50, which was silly list, today, some 30 odd years later, 48 of them are dead.
Really?
Yeah. Number 49, still in prison. He's older than me. And I'm the only one alive and free.
So one's incarcerated, the others all are dead. And were they all killed?
Some were murdered, some died in prison, a few died naturally. But most of them were either murdered or died in prison.
So do you feel lucky that you got out?
Blessed. Yes. I always say this, if you're a made member of that life and you die of old age and you die free, you've really accomplished something. It's a very, very difficult and treacherous life to navigate, to make it all the way through. Tough.
Did you ever make...
Okay, so those are all the clips I'm going to play. It's a fascinating interview. You've probably seen it. If not, go and check it out. I'll put the links in the description. Okay, so I'm going to tell you my kind of overall thoughts of the Michael Franzese, of that interview, etc., etc. I think he's a really good speaker. In that particular interview, who's kind of goaded a little bit, although it was also quite pally by PIERS Morgan. He was interrupted constantly, but he remained calm. What he said to me seemed thoughtful, it seemed honest, it seemed insightful. And I think Michael Franzese, he covered that really fine line between not glamorizing and showing off, but also not kind of dodging difficult questions. He wasn't minimizing anything that he did. He wasn't romanticizing it either. But he was also really honest about his regrets. So that last bit especially is really quite poignant, I think. So Fortune magazine, 50 most influential mobsters. One of them is, he said that he's the only one alive. 48 of them are dead out of 50, and one of them is in prison. And I can completely relate to that, because of the 50 people that I trained with when I was a junior psychiatrist, 49 of them become successful psychiatrists in clinic, and one of them is a delusional social media wannabe failing YouTuber. I haven't showed this clip from the interview. My only kind of criticism of Franzese is that he says he's a fan of Andrew Tate and Donald Trump. Obviously, I'm just kind of semi-joking. You should take my criticism with a pinch of vinegar. Anybody's allowed their opinion. I'm not a fan of those 2 individuals, but I wouldn't judge somebody just because they particularly like them. So if you want to see Andrew Tate being made a fool of, see some of my videos that I've got about Andrew Tate and my psychoanalysis of him on this very channel. If you want to see Donald Trump being made a fool of, see any speech that he's ever made. Okay, so moving on to a broader topic, which is about ex-criminals making money. So there's a recent article in The Guardian, and I'll put the links for it below for the online thing, and there's been a bit of controversy about ex-criminals profiteering from discussing their previous crimes. So, for example, members of the public can pay money to spend an evening with Kevin Lane, who's a previous hitman and killer, to talk about his life and his crimes. And even in the same event, you've got Kenny Collins, who was convicted of the 2015 Hatton Garden burglary. So you can sit down and actually pay as a member of the public to have dinner with these people and hear them speak. Tickets go up to £200. As well as that, the dude you just saw, Michael Franzese, is doing talks in London and Wales and in Scotland. So what are my thoughts? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that I think that you'd probably agree that I'm a little bit biased because I'm trying to have a media career here. I'm talking about some of my cases. So I've recently done podcasts for LADbible, Happy Hour, True Geordie. Shout out to all those people, by the way. And here's the thing, I'm very, very careful about what I say and how much I disclose. So I never mention the names of any of my ex-patients. I occasionally change details. So the essence of the stories are true, but I change like some background details. You know, sometimes if they're men, I call them women, and vice versa. I say they're from a different part of the country, just to make them less identifiable, to protect their identity. I've done the very same thing in my book, In Two Minds. It's a bit of a shameless plug, but my point is that I talk about my stories in my book, but I change details. And I know you're probably thinking, hang on, isn't that a bit hip? Isn't it a bit weird that I'm making a video about profiteering, about talking about true crime cases, and I'm advertising my own book? I'm allowed to do that because I am a hypocrite. Anyway, my point that I wanted to make is I think it's okay to talk about these things, but it depends on the tone. So for example, in my book, I talk about lots of shocking cases. One of them that I've talked about publicly in podcasts a lot is this 18-year-old girl, Yasmin, and again, that's not her real name, who killed her nephew in a flash of psychosis. Really, really tragic. She had these delusional beliefs that she genuinely believed at the time that her nephew had demons inside of him and that she could reincarnate him. Upon my evidence, she got a hospital order for rehabilitation in a psychiatric unit because I believed that she had schizoaffective disorder. She was really unwell at the time, as opposed to going to a life sentence in prison. But anyway, that's just a very brief bit of background. But my point is this: the message in my book isn't, look at Yasmin, isn't she crazy? My message isn't, dangerous people are mentally ill, and you should be scared of everybody with schizophrenia. The point or the purpose of that story is just the tragedy of the whole case and how mental illness can impact people's lives, how extremely rare. I really make that point in the book because I don't want to scaremonger for no reason. So it's extremely rare for somebody with schizophrenia to do something like that, schizoaffective disorder. And the book is about her redemption and her sort of building her relationships back up with her brother. She spent many years in the psychiatric unit. She initially didn't believe what we were saying was the truth, and she didn't believe that she'd ended her nephew's life, and she had those psychotic beliefs, and it took a long time for us to cure them, basically. So all of this is to say that, in my view, it's okay to talk about previous issues as long as you're being completely honest and you're not glamorizing it. You're not talking about how exciting it was. And I think that's exactly right. I think Michael Franzese has that tone. So not just in his interview with PIERS Morgan, but also in his YouTube channel. He's honest about it. He's not glamorizing. He does say certain aspects were exciting. And the other thing is, in the interview, he says that in some ways, some of it is exaggerated. So for example, PIERS asked him about Frank Sinatra being tied to the mob. And Michael Franzese said basically, yeah, Frank Sinatra was a friend of ours and we wanted his help, but we didn't control him. So my point being is that he didn't kind of over-egg it. It seemed that he took away some of the myths, whereas he could have done the opposite if he wanted to make it sound more sexy and exciting than it was. And I have to say, this interview and other things that Michael's talked about, some bits are a bit sad. They're a bit depressing. So for example, at one point, PIERS talks about how there's a hit out against Franzese many, many years ago because of some of the things that he said publicly. And his own father didn't put out the hit, but he permitted it to happen, which is pretty heartbreaking. And as we saw in the clip I played you, he certainly said that he has regrets. So the problem is that there's so much content and so many people making YouTube channels that it's quite hard not to be tempted to do clickbait, because controversy basically sells. People are going to go and watch things that are more controversial rather than things that are balanced. A wise philosopher, I think it was Socrates, said, all of this controversy circles me, and it seems like the media immediately points a finger at me, so I point one back at them, but not the index or pinky or the ring or the thumb. It's the one you put up when you don't give a flip, when you won't just put up. Sorry, chill out, Socrates. Jeez, what's wrong with you? And there is often a quote that's attributable to Oscar Wilde, which is, the only one thing in the world worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Clearly, Oscar Wilde has never seen a Dr. Grande video. Oh no, he didn't. Anyway, sorry, I'm going a bit off tact. What I'm trying to say is that most people believe or want to hear a redemption story like Michael Franzese. And lots of these people that go out and talk publicly about, people that are ex-criminal, that talk about their previous life of crime, they've gone on this kind of redemption journey, and they've reversed their lives. So you get ex-gang members talking about knife crimes in school to put people off. And it's a free market. So I think that's another thing that, like it or not, you have to take into consideration. People want to know these stories. Michael Franzese is popular because he's a very good speaker and he's very balanced, but also because people want to know what it was actually like in the Mafia. People watch Goodfellas. By the way, he's actually briefly mentioned in Goodfellas. His actual name, one of my all-time favourite movies. I think there's a slight grey area, if I'm being honest, where for people might want to know the gory detail of the actual crimes itself, and you can't really miss too much of that out because, again, that's what people want. So this brings me to point number 2, which is, I think it's about the tone of what the individual is saying. So ultimately, are they showing off? So I know for a fact that in TV world, commissioners, producers, the people at the top of the hierarchy are very sensitive about this. And there's definitely a pressure not to glamorize, and there's a pressure to put victims first. And I know this for a fact because I talk to producers about potential TV shows. Still, nothing's happened for me, but they make it really, really clear that this works and this doesn't work, and the reason this doesn't work is because it's not victim-centric enough, or it's glamorizing this, blah, blah, blah. And on top of that, as you might know, I do lots of sound bites for various documentaries. I'm a talking head, and I've occasionally said things that are true and are factual, and I've been asked to reword it or to take them out. So, for example, if the victim there's one case where they were involved in a drug deal and they got brutally murdered. I wasn't allowed to say it was a drug deal. I had to say something a bit more vague. There was another case where there was a particular victim who was quite promiscuous and she'd been sexually assaulted. And what I said, I think the documentary makers make me word it in a certain way because they don't want a narrative of being seen to be victim blaming, and they're very scared of this cancel culture of being criticized. And let's be crystal clear, the things that I said, I only said because they were factual, they were truth, they were actually part of the story. But still, everything's the tone of true crime documentaries is really, really sort of carefully thought out. YouTube channels they're a bit of a grey area, aren't they? Because they don't answer to these big networks. Obviously, there are lots of channels that do glamorize violence. It's not hard to find on the internet. There are drill videos, for example, talking about ops. There are prison channels who seem to show off about the crimes they've committed. There's literally hundreds of multicolored hair, facial tattooed apparent rappers who have about as much talent as the juice that I dropped off in the toilet half an hour ago. So I suppose my point is that it's for the YouTube creators, it's up to the content creators. They don't have to answer to commissions. They don't have to answer to networks. So just to complicate matters, just to throw a hammer into the works, what's the term? Just to put a butterfly into the ointment. I think that it's complicated because some people like to be offended. So people go out of their way to say that something is offended. As a very quick aside, I've made videos about autism in the past, and I made the comment that autism is a disorder. I got quite a few negative comments. And basically, my point being is that autism is a disorder. That's not something that I have decided myself. It's literally within the diagnostic manuals. It's in the ICD-11. It's in DSM. So I'm not saying that a member of the public that has autism is not valuable. But the person who's making those comments by saying autism isn't a disorder, they're assuming that I'm saying that. So there's a difference there. They are projecting that I'm saying that somebody with autism doesn't have value to society. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a disorder because it is a disorder. And I think it's a bit disrespectful for people that might have extreme autism, who struggle, who need resources, mothers, families, parents that can't cope, that, if you say to them, oh, it's not a disorder, but their child is really, really unwell, needs 24-hour care, That's a bit insulting. That's like saying, to somebody who's got a really debilitating physical disease, oh, that's not real pain. It's not really up to you. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off a bit of a tangent there. What I'm saying is that people get offended, and it's a fine line between glamorizing and being a bit too catering a bit too much for the easily offended. Okay, we're going to go on to the next topic, which is about these true crime conventions. Before I do that, I just want to really briefly introduce you to this channel. This is Schmike for Small Minds. It's a smorgasbord of videos related to mental illness and criminality and the crossover betwixt the two. I implore you to subscribe, because if you, not only does it help me out immeasurably, but if you do, you will have better internet connection for the rest of your life, guaranteed all your money back. Recent videos that I've done, 5 myths about murderers, 5 myths about female prisons, go chickadee, check it out. Okay, let's get on to it. The next topic is about true crime conventions. So shout out CrimeCon. I have been a speaker in most of their events. So I do fully admit that I am biased, but I wouldn't participate in something like this if I thought it was lurid and sensationalist, because, well, first of all, ethically, for my own ethics, but also I'd get in trouble. I would get in trouble if I was talking at one of these things, if it wasn't sensitive, if it wasn't victim-centric. So these true crime conventions, they have to speak about different aspects of crime, and they have to describe some crimes because people are interested. But it's very much about not just the crimes that were committed, but about solving crimes. So there's ex-police detectives, there's lawyers, there's judges, there's police commissioners, there's even like a little symposium about police dogs and sniffer dogs, and they have actual victims of crimes and their families. So they have families of people that have been previously murdered in gang crimes talking about the impact. There was one speaker that I saw recently who was wrongly imprisoned for decades for murder, and then he was talking about his whole journey of the legal battle that he faced. So yes, there are ex-criminals, and I have listened to talks at these kind of true crime conventions by ex-criminals, but they're not glorifying the details of their crime. They're talking about their backgrounds, the reasons they get into crime, and most importantly, they have a redemption arc. So to conclude, I think it's okay for ex-criminals to talk about their crimes and to make a profession and money off it. I think it's a fine line. I think as long as it's done in the right tone and the right purpose, so it's not there to glamorize, then I think it is reasonable. So we've learnt what my thoughts are. Let me hear what your thoughts are in the comment section below. We've also learnt that you're a bunch of snowflakes who like to be offended. Just kidding. Right, I've banged on enough. Let me know about whether you think it's reasonable for people like myself or even ex-criminals to talk about their crimes, or are we just greedy, selfish capitalists? Let me know in the comment section below. Have a blessed day, and do not forget, I love you.